It was a quiet evening in the house, one of those evenings when silence seems almost oppressive. My husband, Richard, had gone out of town to work again, leaving me alone to run the household and take care of myself. These long evenings often made me reflect on the paths life had taken me down, the choices I had made, and what had been done for me. I was always drawn to solitude, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. The house was dimly lit. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator as I sat there, immersed in my thoughts. And then I heard a faint noise coming from the bathroom. At first, I mistook it for the creaks and groans of an old house sinking into the night, but the sound didn't stop. Moderate curiosity was replaced by apathy, and I got up to see what was wrong. As I approached the bathroom door, I hesitated. A soft yellow light was pouring into the hallway. For a moment, I decided to turn back. After all, this was Alex's space, my stepson's private sanctuary. But something, perhaps anxiety, perhaps simple curiosity, compelled me to go forward. From the small doorway, I saw him standing at the sink, shirt off, water running down his arms. He looked preoccupied, concentrating on washing his face, completely oblivious to my presence. The expression on his face amazed me. He was no longer the boy I'd met years ago, when Richard and I had first gotten married. Alex had grown into a young man, tall, slender, with a quiet confidence I hadn't noticed before. A wave of anxiety swept over me. I shouldn't have been there, shouldn't have been watching. Yet my feet felt as if they were chained to the spot. Thoughts raced through my mind. Is he okay? Is he in pain? Or is this just part of his nightly routine? The motherly part of me wanted to intervene, to offer advice, but the other part of me, the part I wasn't proud of, felt the exact opposite. Just as I was about to leave for my room, he looked up. His eyes met mine through the crack in the door. Wide with surprise and confusion, he froze. For a moment we didn't move or speak, as if time itself had stopped. "I didn't know anyone was home," he stammered, breaking the silence. His voice trembled, the embarrassment obvious. "I thought you might need help," I whispered, my voice sounding unsure and unconvincing even to myself. Alex's cheeks flushed, and he looked away slightly, clearly embarrassed. "No, I'm fine. I can handle it." But I didn't walk away. Instead, I stepped into the room, shortening the distance between us. "It's okay," I said softly, trying to sound soothing. "If you need help, you can tell me." His shoulders tensed, but he didn't pull away. There was vulnerability in his expression, a mixture of embarrassment and relief. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he muttered, barely audible. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to soften his discomfort. "There's nothing to be embarrassed about," I said, though my own nerves were starting to give way. He didn't respond immediately, his gaze staring downward as if he were trying to make himself invisible. The vulnerability of his posture awakened something maternal in me, but that feeling was complicated by the rush of something I couldn't put a name to. "I just didn't know what to do," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's different now." His words hung in the air, and I could see the struggle in his eyes, a mixture of shame and confusion. "It's normal," I replied, my tone soft but firm. "Growing up brings its challenges, but you're coping." I pulled out a towel and held it out to him like a lifeline. "Here," I said, creating some distance between us. He hesitated but took it, his hands shaking slightly as he wiped himself off. "You really think that's okay?" he asked with a note of doubt in his voice. I nodded, trying to sound convincing. "Everyone goes through changes. There's no shame in it." My words should have reassured him, but I couldn't ignore the subtle change in the air between us. "You say it's so easy," he said with a nervous grin, "but it doesn't feel that way to me." "Because it's new," I replied, leaning against the sink to seem less intimidating. "It takes time to figure things out. You're not a kid anymore, and that brings with it a whole host of problems." He nodded slowly, clutching the towel tighter. "I just don't know if I'm doing it right," he admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing." Without thinking, I put my hand on his shoulder. "You're doing fine," I said softly. "You'll figure it out. You're going to be okay." The hours that followed passed in uncomfortable silence. I tried to immerse myself in the routine of folding laundry and cleaning the living room, but my thoughts kept returning to that moment in the bathroom. Every creak in the house made me flinch, and every shadow seemed to carry a weight of guilt. Alex was unusually quiet too. He usually spent his evenings in the kitchen or watching TV, but tonight he stayed in his room. A faint stirring could be heard outside the door, but he didn't come out. Richard came home the next day, cheerful and oblivious to the change in our family. As I watched him go back to his usual routine, I felt more and more guilty. How could I sit across from him at dinner and pretend everything was fine? Alex avoided direct conversation, answering only briefly and politely. Richard noticed it, but didn't insist, writing it off as typical teenage mood swings. That night, unable to sleep, I found Alex sitting on the back porch. I cautiously approached, unsure of what to say. "We need to talk," I said quietly. He didn't answer right away, his eyes staring at the ground. "I've been thinking about this a lot," he said finally. "I don't know how to act around you anymore. It's like everything's changed." I nodded, hesitating before answering. "Maybe not forgotten," I said carefully, "but we can move forward. We're a family, Alex. That means something." He looked up, his expression a mixture of hope and doubt. "But what if it doesn't? What if it's too awkward?" "Awkwardness shouldn't define us," I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "It's all about the choices we make now. We can decide that this moment will teach us about trust and understanding." Alex nodded slowly, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I want things to go back to the way they were." "Me too," I said sincerely. The silence that followed was softer this time, more condescending. As we sat together on the porch, the tension eased a little. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start, and it was enough for the moment. The following weeks became a test of boundaries and unspoken agreements. I immersed myself in the routine of daily life, each task distracting me from lingering anxiety. Richard went unnoticed, his cheerful presence in stark contrast to the emotional currents between Alex and me. Once or twice I noticed him watching me, as if sensing something amiss, but he didn't utter a word. Alex seemed to have found his footing too. He spent more time outside, his laughter echoing faintly as he talked to his friends on the phone. The tension in our communication gradually eased, replaced by cautious attempts at normalcy. We shared meals, brief conversations, and the occasional smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One evening, while Richard was reading the newspaper in the living room, Alex approached me in the kitchen. His voice was hesitant but confident. "Thank you for everything. I mean, for understanding." I paused, feeling his gratitude settle into the space between us. "You don't need to thank me," I said softly. "We're a family, Alex. That's what matters." As he left the room, a sense of relief swept over me. The road ahead wasn't easy, but for the first time I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps with time and effort, we could rebuild the trust that had been shaken. And perhaps in doing so, we would become stronger, more resilient, and closer than ever before.